the case of Antonia Bar. Antonia Bar was born on December 3, 1999, in Tomoco, Chile, to a wealthy family. She was the youngest of 5 children, with 2 older brothers, Sebastian and Ignacio, and 2 sisters, Catalina and Carla. Antonia was particularly close to Catalina, whom she considered her best friend and confidant. Her parents valued education and encouraged their children to pursue their interests, including sports and music. As the youngest child, Antonia was especially loved and spoiled by her parents. Despite this, she was a diligent student and dreamed of studying tourism and traveling the world. At the age of 15, Antonia met Martin Perdinas on social media in 2015. Martin was 8 years older than Antonia and lived in the same city. He was divorced and had a child from a previous marriage. Little is known about Martin's early life, except that he was born in February 1992 in Tomoco to Ivan Pronis and Paula Dare. When Martin was 20, he got a girl from his school pregnant, and to avoid scandal and punishment, he married her. However, the marriage ended shortly after the birth of their child. Martin and Antonia were acquaintances who knew each other from socializing with young people on social networks between 2015 and 2017. However, their relationship remained purely platonic. After Antonia graduated from high school and enrolled in university, she relocated to a different city, and they lost touch. At university, Antonia focused on her studies in the travel industry, formed new friendships, and explored new hobbies. Martin was no longer on her mind. During her breaks from university, Antonia would return to her hometown but primarily stayed in touch with her family, including her parents and siblings. During her time at university, Antonia developed a close bond with a fellow student named Consuela Herb, and they became nearly inseparable. She also started a romantic relationship with a student named Rodrigo Aguad, which lasted for approximately a year. However, they got into a dispute at the beginning of the new semester in September 2019 and decided to take a break from each other. Antonio had recently gone through a breakup and was feeling down. Luckily, the Chilean national holiday was just around the corner, offering a long weekend and a chance to take her mind off things. She and her best friend decided to attend an electronic music festival in the charming town of Pucón. They carpooled with 3 classmates using Consuela's car. As it happened, close friends of Antonio's family owned a summer house in Pucón, and since the owners were out of town, they kindly offered Antonio and her friend the use of their house, even providing them with the spare key. Upon arrival, the group split up, and they friends settled into the spacious and cozy house, looking forward to a relaxing weekend getaway. On the evening of September 18th, Antonia ran into Martin while walking around the city, and they struck up a conversation. As it turned out, Martin was also in town for the festival with his friends and was staying in a large rented house just outside the city center. They hit it off and made plans to meet up the next day at a party at a popular nightclub. Antonia called her parents to fill them in on her plans, and her father warned her to be careful and not to drink too much. Antonia laughed it off and promised to be responsible. The next day, Antonia and her friends spent hours getting ready for the party, choosing outfits and doing their makeup. Before heading out, they shared a bottle of wine and then took a taxi to the club. When they arrived, they ordered a bottle of champagne at the bar and drank it together before hitting the dance floor. It was after midnight when Martin and his friends arrived at the club. Antonia was already quite drunk by then, but she continued to drink and dance with Martin. According to her friend, Consuela, Antonia was advised to slow down, but she didn't listen. At one point, Consuela lost track of Antonia and spent half an hour searching for her. When she finally found her, Antonia was in another room with Martin, barely able to stand due to her intoxication. Consuela saw her classmate Benjamin Morales at the club and asked for his help in getting her friend Antonia home. However, Antonia refused to leave, saying the night was still young. A short while later, she started to feel unwell, and her friends took her outside for some fresh air. After she felt a bit better, she returned to the club. Consuela went to Antonia later that night and told her that she was exhausted and ready to head home. However, Antonia declined, wanting to stay and continue having fun. Consuela then left the club, giving up on convincing Antonia to leave with her. She took a taxi home and went straight to bed. Benjamin saw Martine escorting Antonia out of the club, holding her because she was swaying from side to side. According to Benjamin, Antonia was too drunk to fight back, and Martine took advantage of her state. They waited near the entrance for a while, allowing Antonia to recover a bit. Soon, Martine's friends arrived and suggested they continue partying at their rented house. The company ordered a taxi, but Martine and Antonia decided to walk, as she was unwell and disoriented. Surveillance cameras captured their walk, showing the man supporting a drunk student who was trying to break free from his grasp. Along the way, they stopped at a 24-hour supermarket, where Martine purchased beer. Inside the empty store, Martine attempted to kiss she, but she pushed him away and turned her back on him. It was clear she was uncomfortable, but her intoxication left her unable to resist or escape. Martine, being stronger, continued to lead Antonia, and they eventually arrived at the rented house around 8 a.m. The people in the living room saw that she was upset, but she was too drunk to clearly communicate her distress. Despite Antonia's obvious unease, Martine continued to hug and try to kiss her. The other friends, also heavily intoxicated, failed to intervene. Eventually, they retreated to a bedroom, where the man assaulted she while she was in a dazed state. Antonia was confused and disoriented as Martine ignored her attempts to resist and stop him. After the incident, he rejoined his friends in the living room and continued the party, leaving Antonia alone in the bedroom. Later, around 9 a.m., she managed to call Benjamin, but her speech was slurred and she was crying uncontrollably, making it hard for him to understand her. She was unable to explain what had happened or where she was. Benjamin became concerned and called Consuela, telling her that Antonia was in trouble and needed help. Antonia then called Consuela herself, struggling to communicate, and eventually found out her location, prompting Consuela to go to her aid. When Consuela met Martine at the doorstep, she asked him what had happened, but he just smiled and claimed that everything was consensual. However, when Consuela found her friend, Antonia, in one of the rooms, she was shocked by her condition. Antonia was crying and begged to be taken away from the place as soon as possible. They left shortly after and went home, where Antonia immediately took a shower. Despite her friend's advice to preserve the evidence and report the incident to the police, Antonia insisted that no one should ever find out what had happened. She tried to act normally when she spoke to her parents later that day, hiding her true emotions. The next morning, Antonia and her friends returned to the student dormitory. In the aftermath, Antonia struggled to cope with the trauma. She tried to forget the nightmare and resume her normal life, attending classes and socializing with friends. However, only Consuela noticed that Antonia was not okay. As time passed, Antonia's mental state deteriorated, and she gradually fell into a deep depression. Antonia was traumatized and didn't want to talk to anyone about what had happened to her. She refused to file a police report, fearing that it would only spread the news and make things worse. However, rumors about her began to circulate quickly. They would whisper, point, and laugh at her. One of her classmates even had the audacity to ask her about the rumors in front of everyone. However, what sent Antonia over the edge was a phone call from Rodrigo, her ex-boyfriend, with whom she still had strong feelings and had been holding on to the hope of rekindling their relationship. During the call, Rodrigo repeated all the rumors he had heard and told Antonia that he never wanted to see her again. Antonia broke down in tears, trying to defend herself and explain that the rumors were not true. But Rodrigo was unforgiving, using derogatory language to describe her and calling her promiscuous before hanging up. This conversation was devastating for Antonia, and she couldn't cope with the emotional pain. On Saturday, October 12, 2019, Antonia went to her parents' house, seeking comfort and solace with her family. Concern for Antonia's well-being grew as her relatives noticed a deep sadness in her eyes, despite her claims that everything was okay. Later that evening, she posted old childhood photos on social media, accompanied by a distressing message. The following day, after dinner with her family, Antonia retreated to her room on the third floor. Her sister Catalina checked on her about an hour later, but Antonia asked to be left alone, saying she wanted to sleep. Catalina granted her wish, turned off the light, and bid her a loving goodbye before leaving the room. 2 hours passed before their mother, Marcella, came to Antonia's room to announce that dinner was ready. After knocking on the door with no response, Marcella entered the room and initially thought Antonia was asleep. However, upon touching her hand, she was met with an unsettling stillness. Devastated, Marcella screamed for help, and the rest of the household rushed to the room. In a state of panic, they called for emergency services while attempting to revive Antonia on their own before medical professionals arrived. Antonia's situation had become hopeless, and she tragically took her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills. The investigation into her death and the first attempts to hold the perpetrator accountable began. The news shocked her family and friends, as many were unaware of the severe emotional distress Antonia had been experiencing. As Antonia's parents sought to understand what had happened to their daughter, they spoke with her friends and classmates. They were shocked by the rumors and gossip that had been circulating about Antonia. Consuela, in particular, shared everything she knew, but the parents felt that more needed to be done. They hired a top private detective to help reconstruct the events leading up to Antonia's death and gather evidence to bring the person responsible to justice. Alejandro, determined to seek justice for his daughter, used his connections to organize a press conference. In front of dozens of cameras, he shared the devastating truth. His daughter had been the victim of forced bullying, which she had been unable to survive. The person responsible, he emphasized, remained at large. The detective reconstructed the timeline of events from that fateful night and gathered statements from several key witnesses, including Consuela, Benjamin, and a few other university students who were willing to testify in court. With all the evidence collected, the Antonia family petitioned the court to arrest and prosecute Martin for his actions. However, the police determined that the evidence presented was insufficient to warrant taking him into custody. Martin claimed that everything that happened was consensual, although he admitted that both parties were intoxicated. Furthermore, the victim did not report the incident to the police. As a result, Martin remained free, and he and his family subsequently filed a lawsuit against the Antonia family, accusing them of defamation, harassment, and the unauthorized disclosure of their personal information. According to the Martin family, Antonia's relatives had slandered their son and brother, Martin. In response, the Martin family decided to hold a press conference to defend themselves publicly. They argued that Martin's reputation had been harmed without justification and presented themselves as the ones who had been wronged. The Martin family also accused Antonia of sharing their personal contact information, including their home address, phone numbers, and social media handles. As a result, Martin and his family received daily insults and anonymous death threats. The Martin family maintained that Martin's guilt had not been proven and that everything had happened by mutual consent. They expressed their willingness to defend Martin's case in court. Surprisingly, after the statement, the police supported the Martin family, causing Antonia's relatives to stop making negative comments about them and to stop sharing personal data. This sudden change was a major blow. This unexpected turn of events was a significant setback. Despite this, Antonia's relatives continued to seek justice with the support of the public. Victims who were initially silent about their experiences began speaking out after Antonia's case gained widespread public attention. Within a month, 8 more girls came forward to the police, claiming they too had been harassed and assaulted by Martin. They had previously remained silent, fearing they would be condemned and censured. One of the victims was just 13 years old at the time of the assault. As more girls who suffered at the hands of Martin began contacting the police, he was eventually taken into custody. Martin was arrested in June 2020 and held at Tomoko City Prison on suspicion of committing assaults between 2011 and 2019. However, Martin was released on his own recognizance less than a month after his lawyer intervened and was allowed to remain free for the duration of the investigation. Furthermore, several lawsuits filed by the injured girls were rejected due to the statute of limitations having expired. There was a high likelihood that many cases would be disregarded. Out of 8 appeals, only 2 were registered by the court. The release of Martin from custody and the rejection of the victim's claims sparked widespread outrage. Protests and rallies erupted nationwide, with thousands demanding justice. In response, the prosecutor's office re-examined the case and pushed for a change in Martin's bail conditions, seeking to return him to custody. Meanwhile, the statute of limitations was lifted for all cases of violence committed by Martin. During his trial in February 2021, his social media messages were revealed, in which he boasted about his actions to friends. It was also discovered that Martin kept a collection of his victims' underwear at home, taken as trophies. This collection included items from victims who had previously reported him to the court, as well as a belonging of Antonia's. On August 26, 2021, Martin was charged with 9 counts of crimes involving sexual misconduct. 3 of the victims were minors when the incidents occurred. The Antonia family appealed to the public to speak out against violence and bring those responsible to justice. The trial began in June 2022, allowing Martin's lawyers sufficient time to prepare. They presented witness statements and surveillance footage showing that Antonia left with the defendant voluntarily and did not attempt to resist him. The defense challenged the testimonies of other victims, but in August 2022, the court delivered a guilty verdict against Martin. He was convicted of 8 crimes involving sexual misconduct and causing Antonia's nervous breakdown, which ultimately led to her death. Martin was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, his lawyers, led by Pinus, promptly filed an appeal. On December 29th, the Supreme Court ordered a new trial. In March 2023, Martin's case was assigned to the Public Defender's Office. During the new trial, Martin maintained his innocence, attributing the events leading to Antonia's death to the large quantity of alcohol they had consumed together. Despite this, on July 7, 2023, Martin was found guilty again. The court reduced his initial 20-year sentence to 17 years, considering the 3 years he had already spent in prison. He had only 14 years left to serve. However, Antonia's family expressed dissatisfaction with this decision in an official press release made by her father. They noted that no punishment could bring back their daughter. During the ongoing lawsuits, Antonia's family and other victims affected by Martin's actions joined forces with public figures to advocate for women's rights. Together, they to amend the criminal code, specifically the sections related to sexual offenses. Their objective was to protect the rights of victims of harassment and sexual violence. On May 30th, 1966, a father and his son were fishing on the bank of the Westfield River in West Springfield, and they discovered something larger than a usual fish floating just below the surface of the water. Out of curiosity, they tried casting their fishing net just to be sure it was not a fish. Shockingly to them, a dead body surfaced. That body was 10-year-old Betty Lou Zukowski, who had gone missing for a few days. The fishermen quickly informed the police, who rushed down to the crime scene to investigate the matter. At the time, Mildred and Stanley Zukowski had filed a missing person report of their daughter with the Chicopee Police Department. The police then informed them to come identify if the found body was their lost daughter. The worst fear of a parent is having to bury their own child. Mildred and Stanley prayed for Betty Lou's safety and hoped that she wouldn't be the one found dead in the river. Unfortunately, it seemed luck was far from them, because on getting to the crime scene, they discovered that the dead body was indeed their daughter, Betty Lou Zukowski. On Thursday, May 26, 1966, approximately 57 years ago, 10-year-old Catholic schoolgirl, Betty Lou Zukowski left her family's house on 293 Front Street in Chicopee, Massachusetts around 6 p.m., right after getting a phone call from someone whom she told her mother was her girlfriend. She was supposed to meet up with this girlfriend and hang out for a cup of ice cream. Her parents, being used to their daughter leaving the house often, gave her the permission to go. They never knew that would be the last time they would see their daughter alive. Betty Lou Zukowski prepared to head out as she dressed in a green checkered blouse, blue pants, a jacket, and white sneakers. She also took along with her $2. Later that evening, when Betty Lou failed to return home, her parents, Stanley and Mildred Zukowski, called the Chicopee Police Department around 11:15 p.m. to report her missing. For some reason, they told the police not to declare her publicly missing for a significant amount of hours. Some sources said they were probably used to her staying away from home for that long. However, the Chicopee Police Department quickly issued an all-states alarm in their attempt to find her. They later learned that the girlfriend Betty Lou talked about was not real. The search for her continued for 3 days without progress, but sadly, 4 days later, on the 30th of May 1966, which appeared to be a Memorial Day, Betty Lou's battered and mud-covered body was found offshore by 2 young men fishing in the Westfield River in West Springfield. According to autopsy results, her cause of death was determined to be multiple blunt force injuries to her head, a skull fracture, and terminal drowning. Betty Lou was still alive when she went into the Westfield River, and she had not been sexually assaulted. The police believed that she was beaten within 15 minutes of her drowning. After discovering Betty Lou's remains, there was a joint homicide investigation led by the West Springfield Police Department and assisted by the Chicopee Police Department. These police departments initially assigned their entire detective bureaus to the case. The Hampton County District Attorney's Office and the Massachusetts State Police were also involved. In order to find clues, there was a thorough search along the shore where Betty Lou's body was found. Also, divers searched the river for any helpful evidence that could pinpoint the perpetrator. Nothing was found, not even the murder weapon. The investigators then interviewed Betty Lou's family, friends, and classmates to determine who she may have met up with at the time of her disappearance and eventual murder. Her Chicopee friends had told police that she liked exploring the caves that were dug into the bank of Chicopee River behind the Chicopee Electric Light Company. Police, however, checked all the places she loved to explore but found nothing that could lead them to her killer. According to police and news reports from the time of her death, Betty Lou was portrayed as a loose girl. Her friends described her as smart, kind, funny, adventurous, energetic, and spunky. They said she had dyed her dark brown hair to blonde at the age of 10. She wore makeup, had pierced ears, and often wore cross-shaped earrings. According to her close friends, she had been seen at times with teenage boys, hanging out with them mostly in their cars. Some people said Betty Lou was probably in a hurry to grow up at the age of 10, and her free-spirited nature must have made her trust an older person who eventually took advantage of her and murdered her. Betty Lou's friend had told investigators that she had once said she was seeing a boy named Ralph. Back in 1966, according to her friend's description of Ralph, he was a white, 17 or 18 years old male with black hair, brown eyes, medium complexion, and often wore black framed glasses. He was said to be 5'5" and weighed between 125 and 135 pounds. He drove either a Chevrolet that had a dark blue bottom with either a white or light blue top or a dark green Chevrolet sedan. However, the police discovered that the name Ralph was non-existent. Betty Lou had either lied about Ralph's real name or Ralph had lied to Betty Lou about his name. The police believed that Betty Lou knew the person who killed her. Otherwise, she would not have left her home after receiving the phone call on Thursday night. Detectives claimed that she met up with this person and ended up in West Springfield after riding in a vehicle operated by someone she knew. However, in the days following the discovery of her body, there was no significant leads. On June 2, 1966, Betty Lou Zukowski was buried on her 11th birthday. Her funeral was held at Holy Name Church in Chicopee and was conducted with high mass honors. Several schoolmates from her 5th grade class at the Valentine School in Chicopee were pallbearers. Those who attended her funeral were made up of her entire class and her teacher. Betty Lou was free-spirited and was deeply loved. A week after Betty Lou remains were found, detectives developed a sketch of the suspect from 2 witnesses. One of these witnesses was the last person to have seen Betty Lou alive few hours before she was killed on May 26, 1966. This sketch, however, was similar to Ralph's description. The sketch was later released to the public and was highly publicized in local newspapers at the time. It brought investigators some tips, but none led to the identity of the killer. Having exhausted all leads, the case went cold for years, but after the formation of the Hampton District Attorney's Office's Unresolved Cases Unit in 2019, Betty Lou's homicide case was reopened. Officials then got to find out that in November of 1997, a man named Donald Mars was brought up as a suspect when investigators of the West Springfield Police Department received information from multiple sources that linked him to Betty Lou's killing. However, he was never arrested due to lack of sufficient evidence to pin him to the crime. 25 years later, in 2022, Betty Lou's case gained an intense focus, and on Tuesday, November 1st of 2022, Donald Mars was charged with first-degree murder in the death of Betty Lou Zukowski. A warrant for his arrest was issued. Donald Mars was then taken into custody on the 2nd of November 2022. The evidence that linked him to the murder has not been disclosed yet, but at the press conference, Hampton District Attorney Anthony Guglielmi did mention that significant statements led to Donald Mars' arrest. Someone must have seen something and confessed, or Donald Mars probably implicated himself during interrogation. Donald Mars came from a well-known family in Chicopee. His father, Roger Mars, owned Mars Heating and Service and had 5 sons. Roger Mars served in Korea, and at least 2 of his sons were in the military. Donald Mars was probably one of those sons in the military because at the time of his arrest, he was living at a Veterans Administration facility in Bedford. Donald Mars seemed to have quite a number of crimes in his life book. According to the State Sex Offender Registry Board, in 1995, Donald Mars had been convicted of 2 counts of child rape with force and 3 counts of indecent assault and battery on a child under 14. He is classified as a Level 3 sex offender, which means he is considered most likely to reoffend. When he was convicted in May of 1995, he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison and was released in June of 1997 and given probation. He violated the probation and was given a 5 to 7 year sentence at Cedar Junction. After his convictions, Donald Mars was determined to be sexually dangerous and was civilly committed to the Massachusetts Treatment Center in Bridgewater from 1994 to 2015 before finally landing in a Veterans Administration facility, a hospital in Bedford, Massachusetts, where he was living before his arrest. At the time of Betty Lou's murder, Donald was 17 years of age, and the sketch made from the description of Ralph by Betty Lou's friends is similar to the high school yearbook photo of Mars. Also, at the time of murder, Donald Mars was somewhat familiar with the area where Betty Lou's body was found. According to a newspaper archive, his family used to visit his grandparents' house at 102 Woodmont Street in West Springfield. They went to their home for Christmas, Thanksgiving, and other occasions. This address is a 4-minute drive from the murder scene at the end of Dewey Street. Donald Mars, who is now 73 years old, was arraigned to a Hampton Superior Court indictment charging him with first-degree murder for the killing of Betty Lou. In a proceeding conducted via Zoom, when he was asked to enter his plea, Donald Mars pleaded not guilty while sounding as if he wanted to burst into tears. His criminal history was described, and he was asked to be held without right to bail. This didn't sit well with Donald Mars, as he appeared disdainful. The case was adjourned to May 1, 2023 for a pretrial conference. Sadly, Betty Lou's parents are no more, as they died in the 1980s. Mildred Zukowski, who died at the age of 61, was said to have fell off from her room's window. Some source said she committed suicide since she probably could not take the pain of losing Betty Lou Zukowski, her only child. A year later, Stanley Zukowski died at age 64 from an unknown cause. No siblings of the Zukowski family is recorded alive. However, the Hampton District Attorney, Anthony Guglielmi, has this to say after Donald Mars was finally arrested. Many cold cases had been left unsolved for ages without the perpetrators being brought to book. But recently, families of murder victims now have glimmer of hope, as most of these cases are being truly solved, giving them closure and finally finding peace and rest for their deceased loved ones. We hope that all perpetrators of murder and other horrible crimes be apprehended even before they get a chance to go 6 feet under the ground. Case of John Thomas Maguire. Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were 2 sisters who lived in an orphanage. Living in an orphanage can be extremely challenging. You don't have a place of your own or time to yourself, and if you're unable to stand up for yourself, you're at risk of being bullied by kids who have been there longer. Typically, bullies target children who are loners. Sisters Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were luckier than most, because they can always protect each other. They feel comfortable being around each other and don't try to make friends with anyone. Unfortunately for Anna Marie and Anna Marie, their family secret is about to be revealed. Their father, Larry, has been convicted and imprisoned, and this news has been widely broadcast on television by various news sources. One day, the McClure sisters, Amanda and Anna Marie, helped a new girl named Meredith who was being bullied. Meredith had been living with her mother, who was addicted to drugs. After her mother's death from an overdose, Meredith was too afraid to call for help and stayed with her mother's body for a few days. It wasn't until a friend visited and found her mother's body that emergency services were called. Meredith soon became friends with the McClure sisters, and the three of them had a lot of fun together. Amanda and Anna Marie never told anyone why they were living in an orphanage. And when Meredith asked, Anna Marie made up a story about their father being a police officer who died while on duty to catch a dangerous criminal. Meredith was so impressed with Anna Marie's story that she told it to the other children at the camp. Overnight, the McClure sisters became heroes and were admired by everyone. Most of the kids in the shelter had parents who had died from substance abuse or were in prison, so the McClure sisters' story made them stand out in a positive way. The sisters' secluded life at the orphanage came to an end when all the children wanted to befriend them. However, this marked the beginning of a difficult period in their lives. A heartbreaking truth comes to light. Their father, presumed dead, is actually alive and serving a prison sentence for violence and sex crimes he committed against minors. The sisters' lives became a nightmare. However, they got a second chance when two different families decided to adopt them. This meant they would be living apart and their bond was eventually broken. Amanda, who had previously worried her adoptive parents. They were worried that she would be single forever, and that not having a biological family had a profound effect on her mental health. Amanda's adoptive parents were relieved to learn that she was in a serious relationship with a man named John Thomas Maguire, who was 38 years old. This would be his second marriage, and he had 2 sons from a previous marriage. What reassured them even more was that John seemed to be a perfect partner and always supported her. He also had a friendly relationship with his ex-wife, which was a good sign for Amanda's future with him. After serving his sentence, Larry McClure was pardoned and settled in Virginia. His first priority was to find his daughters. He went straight to Amanda's foster parents, Glenn and Alex, said hello and introduced himself. He asked to see Amanda and requested her contact information, including her address and phone number. Although Larry appeared disheveled and intimidating, with deep wrinkles and dark circles under his eyes, he didn't seem intoxicated. However, his behavior was not quite right. Glenn, Amanda's foster parent, refused Larry's request but promised to inform Amanda that her biological father was looking for her. Larry was taken aback by the term biological father, but he thanked Glenn and left. Glenn did keep his promise. He told Amanda that her father was free and was looking for her. Amanda was torn with a part of her wanting to reject her father, given his past mistakes, and another part wanting to give him another chance. Amanda reaches out to her father, Larry, after many years of separation. Amanda initiates the conversation by calling her father, who is overjoyed to hear from her. Larry asks about her well-being, and she shares that she's doing well, married, and happy. Larry was very happy for his daughter and invited her and her husband to have dinner with him. Amanda is initially uncertain about meeting her father, but he senses her hesitation and reassures her by telling her to forget the old grudges, and he has lived all these years with only one thought, to see her and Anne-Marie. This suggests that Larry has been thinking about his daughters and wants to see them again. Larry's meetings with Amanda and John led to their introduction to the world of illegal substances, which he manufactured himself in his camper. Initially, their financial situation was stable, but Larry manipulated them into funding his substance production. As their addiction deepened, they both lost their jobs. Larry persuaded John to register as a drug addict to receive $180 in state assistance. However, this amount was insufficient to support their habit, and Larry continued to exploit them for money. Meanwhile, Larry met Anna Marie and repeated the same pattern, getting her hooked on substances and taking her money. Amanda and John's situation spiraled out of control. They accumulated huge debts, lost their house, and were forced to move into Larry's camper. John's parents, who were unaware of the situation, were told that they was going on a trip together. In reality, Amanda and John had become entrenched in a cycle of substance abuse and alcohol consumption with Larry, and John's parents have never heard from their son since. On Valentine's Day, John, still reeling from the effects of substance abuse, planned a romantic evening for his wife Amanda at the family circle. He cooked a fancy dinner, inviting Larry and Anna Marie to join them. However, under the prolonged influence of the drugs, a disturbing situation unfolded. Amanda and Larry, who were supposed to be father and daughter, began to develop an inappropriately close relationship. Sadly, John was unaware of this, and as a result, he became redundant in their twisted relationship. During the meal, John spoke very many warm words to Amanda, which made Larry extremely anxious. As the tension increased, Larry interrupted John's speech and asked if he could be completely honest with his wife. John agreed, and Larry suggested a game. They tied John's legs and instructed him to answer truthfully about his life. Initially, the questions covering topics like childhood and school. However, under the influence of drugs, Larry began to accuse John of being an undercover FBI agent. When John denied this, they hit him, although John begging for mercy, but he was ultimately struck on the head with a bottle of wine, the same wine he had brought for the family dinner. Over the course of 2 days, Larry, Amanda, and Anna Marie subjected John to torture while using illegal substances. When they thought it was time to end things, Amanda put a black bag over John's head and tightened it around his neck until he stopped breathing. They buried John in the backyard and then celebrated the engagement of Larry and Amanda, father and daughter, with more drugs and alcohol. On the 3rd day, their mental health worsened. They began to hallucinate, seeing John's ghost, hearing police sirens, and imagining that the ground where they buried John was disturbed as if he might escape and report everything to the authorities. The situation was chaotic, but the father and daughters still decided to take more drastic action. They dug up John's body, checked his pulse, and examined his pupils' reaction to light, even though he showed clear signs of decomposition. This, however, did not convince them that he was truly gone. In a frantic bid to prevent John from coming back to life, they dismembered his body with a wood axe and drove aspen stakes into each piece. They then buried the remains in different locations and covered them with lime to accelerate the decomposition process. 3 weeks later, Larry and Amanda got married. To conceal their relationship, Larry changed his name. The new family aimed to start afresh, moving to Kentucky. They promised each other to stop using illegal substances for good. To avoid suspicion, they even hung an American flag over their front door, just like their neighbors did. By this time, John's ex-wife and parents were becoming increasingly concerned about his lack of contact. In 2019, John's mother even filed a police report regarding his disappearance. Meanwhile, Larry failed to inform the police about his move to another state, which violated his probation terms and led to his return to prison. Larry's mental state deteriorated, especially after long-term substance abuse and alcohol use. This sent him into rehab, leading to anxiety and confusion between what was real and what wasn't, reflected in his disturbing behavior. Larry suspected that the parole violation was merely a pretext for authorities to search his backyard for John's remains. He felt an urgent need to contact Amanda or Anna Marie and instruct them to dig up the body parts and rebury them far from their home. Since all prisoner calls are monitored, he had to find a discreet way to communicate this information. Larry meticulously prepared a speech to convey his message, but ultimately, he was denied the opportunity to make calls. Unable to cope with the situation any longer, he decided to confess to the police. Larry thought that if he confessed to the murder before being charged, he might avoid the death penalty. He even considered blaming his daughters to make his situation better. However, the police officer did not believe him. First of all, what murder? What body parts were buried in the backyard? What crazy idea did this man have? Legally, they had to verify his claims. Initially, the police planned to conduct an investigation. They took his statement, and they found out that John was indeed missing. Police unit was sent to Larry's house. First on the scene, investigators found evidence that Larry had mentioned, confirming all of the criminals. The McClure sisters were quickly apprehended. Amanda and Anna Marie were in shock, unable to believe that their father and stepfather could confess to such a brutal murder. They were even more stunned to learn that Larry was trying to portray himself as an innocent bystander, claiming in his testimony that it was his daughters who killed John, and he was just unwittingly involved in the crime. As the investigation unfolded, each of the family McClure members sought to protect themselves and convinced the police that their involvement was purely accidental. This situation was particularly difficult for John's relatives because there was no body, only remains were found. Those remains had to be carefully collected by forensic experts, transported to his parents, and ultimately buried in a closed coffin. It has been mentioned many that John was a kind person. Despite the challenges they faced, his parents were able to arrange for his burial. Some friends contributed financially, while others assisted with transportation and funeral planning. John was laid to rest at a Lutheran church on October 25, 2019. On February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, a member of the McClure family posted on Facebook, claiming it was a message from John. The post stated that he was going on a long trip and would be out of touch, asking friends not to worry about his absence. This raised suspicions that the family McClure had planned to kill John, and they wanted to deceive others to avoid causing panic. Despite the severity of the crime, but during the trial, Larry and Amanda received an additional 6 months in their sentence due to their illegal father-daughter marriage, which is prohibited in the state. The trial began and Larry testified. He revealed that he had always felt remorse for his children throughout his life. He explained that when they were very young, he committed a serious crime that led to them being placed in an orphanage. Their birth mother had abandoned them, and he was the only one left feeling heartbroken. Larry expressed deep gratitude towards the families who adopted his children, mentioning that he had even prayed for their adoptive parents in churches. He desperately wanted to make up for the years gone by with them and admitted that this might be why he made the choices he did. He describes John as a wonderful young man and expresses his grief for him. He says that if he could change the past, he would, but emphasizes that no one can bring the dead back to life. He mentions his deep love for his daughter Amanda. However, he notes that Amanda does not care about John. Her only concern is taking money from his account. He questions whether anyone would consider killing someone for $180 and that people should recognize Amanda for what she was. He called her a monster, not a human. He stated that he, Amanda, and Marie were addicted to drugs and that they deserved to be punished for their actions. He expressed his desire to speak to the jury and said that regardless of his sentence, he was aware of his health problems and believed that he might not live more than 10 years. He expressed regret for John's passing and again apologized to all of John's loved ones. The trial dragged on because the defendants kept changing their statements about whether they killed John or not. Amanda, unable to bear the long trial, made a deal with investigators. In return, she was assured that she would be charged with involuntary manslaughter at her next trial. Larry then gave another speech. He said, "The 4 of us bought the ingredients to make illegal drugs. Amanda came to me and shared her wish to get revenge on John. The reality is that John, while high on drugs, assaulted Anna Marie, which led to her becoming pregnant. For me, I needed to regain my daughter's trust after years apart. I felt I could not refuse their demands. I often blamed myself for what had happened and thought about ending my life. But I wondered, why should I suffer when this crime was committed by them?" After Larry's speech, it was John's family's turn to speak. John's mother cried uncontrollably and could not express her emotions. She expressed, "Even if one day I can forgive the McClure family, I will never forget what they did. I also hope I live long enough to see one of them die before me." Next, John's children spoke, cursing the killers and declaring that they would never forgive them. The judge delivered the final verdict, sentencing Larry McClure to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the sentence for Amanda was revealed, her adoptive parents regretted telling her that her biological father was looking for her. They had always raised her with the freedom to make her own choices, unaware that this freedom could lead to such dire consequences. At the time the verdict was announced, Amanda stated that her father's jealousy was the root cause of the situation. Her adoptive parents pleaded with the judge to consider that Amanda's involvement in the crime was heavily influenced by Larry's negative impact, asserting that she would never have committed such a violent act otherwise. However, the prosecutors argued that the murder was a planned act, suggesting that Amanda and Larry were conspiring to be together as a couple. The initial hearing focused on Amanda, who was sentenced to 40 years. The judge said Amanda could serve only 20 years. During Anna Marie's sentencing, she attempted to speak out against John's murder. However, she felt pressured by her father and sister to do what they wanted, and she only attended Larry and Amanda's wedding out of concern for her own future. Ultimately, Anna Marie was sentenced to 40 years. This case takes us to North Webster, Indiana. In 1975, the little town of North Webster was known to be quiet, peaceful, and safe. It was a place where residents often kept their doors unlocked. Back then, parents would often give their children the freedom to go ride bikes up and down the traffic-free streets. North Webster was a community where everyone knew each other, and people spent hours hanging out on their front porches. But when Laurel Mitchell was murdered, the news of her death sent shockwaves throughout the small town, and residents were faced with the unsettling possibility that the killer could be someone they knew. The small lake community of North Webster had never before seen a crime like the 1975 murder of Laurel Jean Mitchell. Even today, with the case solved, the community still remembers the case. Laurel Jean Mitchell was born on the 24th of May, 1958 to Richard Dick Mitchell and Wilma Mae Mitchell in Whitley County, Indiana. At the time of Laurel's murder, Dick Mitchell was a well-known public figure in North Webster. He was a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. On the other hand, Laurel's mother, Wilma Mitchell, operated the North Webster Food Pantry at Augsburgers for several years. Apart from Laurel, Dick and Wilmer had two more children named Bruce and Sarah, who were 18 and 12 respectively. Laurel and her siblings had a tight-knit bond despite the occasional siblings' rivalry. Laurel grew up to become a loved personality in North Webster. Her friendly nature and heartwarming smile won over the hearts of everyone she met. She often went out of her way to make other people around her happy and feel loved. Laurel had many talents, in which one of them was her love for singing. This made her join the local church choir. Her love for music did not stop there. She was a good dancer who brushed up her skills by taking dance lessons at a local studio. She found a sense of accomplishment in singing and dancing. By the age of 17, Laurel Mitchell was set to begin her senior year in Wawasee High School. Before the school year began, she decided to take up a job at the Cokesbury Inn, a small restaurant in Epworth Forest, located on the shores of Webster Lake. For her, taking up a job at the restaurant means having the opportunity to gather experience and add value to her life, while she makes a couple of extra bucks. On the 6th of August, 1975, the Mitchells family started their day unaware that a tragedy awaits them by the end of the day. Laurel, Sarah, and a friend of Laurel who stays with them woke up to tackle their morning chores. Bruce, the oldest child and the only son, was not around at the time because he was already married and was serving in the Army in California. Dick and Wilmer got ready for work and bade their daughters goodbye as they headed out to their respective workplace. Later that afternoon, Laurel, who was on a night shift, also headed to work with plans of meeting up with her friends at Adventureland when her shift was over. Oftentimes when she works the night shift, either her mom or dad would pick her up after work. But on the 6th of August, 1975, since she had plans to meet up with her friends, she didn't see the need for her parents to come pick her up. Around 10 p.m., Laurel Mitchell began to wrap up her work for the day, and at exactly 10:15 p.m., she left her workplace and headed out to Adventureland, a once popular amusement park about half a mile away from the restaurant where she worked. On her way there, she passed by a classmate who waved at her as she walked by the entrance to the Epworth Forest, and that appeared to have been the last time Laurel was seen alive. She never made it to Adventureland. Neither her friends nor family knew she was missing or in danger. Her parents believed she was with her friends at Adventureland, when in reality, her friends for some reason had changed location and gone to the county fair that evening. Thinking that Laurel had just gone home after work, the midnight curfew for the Mitchells family passed, and Laurel's family became worried because Laurel had not come back home. They waited through the night, checking the door to see if she would walk in, but Laurel never did. In the early hours of August 7, 1975, at exactly 4:16 a.m., Dick and Wilma Mitchell called the police to report their daughter missing. Neighbors, friends, and the police started out for a search, but Laurel couldn't be found in all the areas they looked for her. However, few hours later, at around 10:30 a.m., a man named Glenn Dixon and his son, Hager Dixon, were about to start fishing in the Elkhart River near Diamond Lake Road Bridge in Noble County when they found a dead body floating in the water. The police were called to the crime scene, and the body was quickly identified to be Laurel Mitchell. The news of Laurel's death shattered her family and the whole community of North Webster, who saw Laurel as a kind, decent, and beautiful person. Laurel was described as smart, boisterous, and motherly, often doting on the neighborhood children. Due to her involvement in the local church choir group, dance classes, and other community events, she was a well-known face in the small town of North Webster. And this was why residents in North Webster were shocked. They wondered who could kill such a sweet girl who wouldn't hurt a fly. On the day Laurel's body was discovered, Dr. Peel Sonk from the Goshen General Hospital in Goshen, Elkhart County, Indiana, performed an autopsy on her. The cause of Laurel's death was determined to be drowning. She showed no obvious signs of trauma aside from several bruises on her hands and shoulder. She was said to have resisted her attacker, fighting for her life. When Laurel was discovered, she was fully clothed, however. The autopsy determined that she had been sexually assaulted. The police ruled the case to be homicide, and the search for Laurel's killer began. Indiana State Police, along with the Kosciuszko County Sheriff's Department, the Noble County Sheriff's Department, and the Noble County Coroner's Office opened an investigation into Mitchell's death. Investigators spent thousands of hours trying to solve her murder. They followed every lead. They interviewed neighbors who lived around the crime scene. A woman named Catherine Flynn, who lived at the area at the time of Laurel's murder, told the police that around 10 p.m. on the 6th of August, 1975, that she heard a loud car turn around next door. She said she heard voices say, "Let's get," or "Let's get her." Another resident with the name Frank Overmere told investigators he also heard a loud vehicle in the neighborhood, possibly an Oldsmobile. The police followed these leads and tried all they could, but the killer of Laurel could not be found. Over the next 5 decades, numerous detectives continued to work on her case. With no improved DNA technology in the 1970s, the Laurel Mitchell's case was gradually getting cold. After waiting for years to get answers, sadly, Dick and Wilmer Mitchell couldn't cheat nature as they passed away from natural causes at the age of 82 in 2012. However, despite the case growing colder by the day, Laurel's sister Sarah Mitchell never gave up hope of finding answers. Every year she would appeal to the media to once again cover her sister's story and always maintain contact with Detective Kevin Smith, who was assigned to Laurel's case. During one of her chats with the detective, Sarah mentioned that a family friend had told her a small band from Delphi, Indiana called Celebrate the Sun, consisting of several boys and girls around the ages of 16 to 20, had played a show that evening at the Cokesbury Inn and had left around the same time Laurel was last seen alive. The family friend also mentioned seeing the same group at the fire station later that evening. He described seeing a woman having a panic attack and hyperventilating outside of the fire station. He said the woman was accompanied by a group of guys all around the ages of 16 to 20 who were trying to calm her down. The detective then told Sarah that this tip had never been reported and felt it was worth investigating. Investigators then tracked down the members of the band. It was, however, discovered that they were a performing church group who were not from Delphi and had never stopped at the fire station that evening. The case went cold again, but in June 2013, a year after Laurel's parents died, Renee Sexton, a Florida woman who was 16 years old and living in Noble County in 1975, contacted the county sheriff's department to inform them that she had gone on a date with a man called John Wayne Leffman, and as he was driving her back home, he admitted his involvement in a crime that he committed with his friend, Fred Bandy. John Wayne Leffman had told the woman details that were consistent with the police findings when Laurel's body was found, including the anatomical findings from the autopsy results. In 2014, Bill McDonald, who was a high school sophomore at the time of Laurel's murder, told police that he socialized with a man named Fred Bandy while in high school, and that Fred Bandy told him after Laurel Mitchell's murder that he had committed the crime and also provided details of the location where her body was found. In 2019, another man told the police that he and Bill McDonald had attended a high school party with Fred Bandy, John Wayne Leafman, and others when Mitchell's murder came up. Fred Bandy then stated that he and John Wayne Leafman committed the crime of killing Laurel Mitchell together. These multiple confessions were what the investigators needed to pursue the case vigorously once again. After the last witness came forward with the same information, in 2019, Laurel Mitchell's clothes and other evidence preserved from the crime scene in 1975, where he submitted for DNA testing at the Indiana State Police Laboratory. The forensics developed a profile for a possible suspect. 3 suspects who were initially on the list of the investigators were eliminated and attention was shifted to Fred Bandy for a buccal swab. On December 5, 2022, authorities visited Fred Bandy at his residence, explaining to him the reason they were there and asking for a sample of his DNA. Surprisingly, Fred Bandy did not put up a fight. He voluntarily provided the DNA sample. Fred Bandy's buccal swab was then taken to the lab for testing, and the results showed that Fred Bandy is more likely to be the contributor of the DNA found in Laurel Jane Mitchell's clothing than any other unknown person. A search warrant on Fred Bandy's home was issued, and during the search, investigators later discovered that Fred Bandy had a 1971 Oldsmobile. In 1975, it is believed that the Oldsmobile was used by him and John Wayne Leafman to bring Mitchell to the Mallard Roost public access site in Noble County, where they forcibly removed her from the vehicle and deliberately drowned her. Additionally, information from the Indiana court database shows that Fred Bandy is a twice-convicted child molester, deemed a sexually violent predator in Elkhart County. On Monday, 6th of February 2023, 47 years and 6 months after her death, the Indiana State Police and the Noble County Sheriff's Department arrested Fred Bandy and John Wayne Leafman in their respective homes and charged them with the murder of Laurel G. Mitchell. Both suspects are being held in the Noble County Jail without bond. Following the arrest of Laurel's killers, her sister, Sarah Nicely Mitchell, said, "They basically blew up my family. For a lot of years, it was rage. If I could have killed them myself, I would have. If they gave them the electric chair, I would have thrown the switch. I'm glad they are going to be punished, that they won't be able to hurt anyone else. But she's still dead." She remembered her sister and said, "She was just a good, kind, decent person. She was an awesome person. Wherever she went, she had to take me with her. That wasn't fun for her, but it was for me. She didn't deserve this. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." A woman's body was found beaten, strangled, and burned on Staten Island, New York's East Shore in 1991. It was a passerby that found the victim's body in the weeds off a South Beach road just after dawn on September 20th, 1991. She was found face up, handcuffed, partially clothed, and burnt in a vacant lot. She had 17 blows to her head and a hammer was recovered at the scene. Investigators believe the hammer was used to commit the crime. On the woman's body, authorities also found a black dress, 2 gold chains, a ring watch, 30 cents, and a pack of Newport cigarettes. Police were initially unable to identify the perpetrator or the victim, leaving the case unsolved. An individual with the name Lloyd L. was identified, but that was as far as it got. There was no other indication that he was involved. He could not be prosecuted or exonerated at that time. Given the circumstances, the victim became known as the girl with the scorpion tattoo for decades, referring to a distinctive scorpion tattoo found on her body. In 2008, the district attorney's office revisited the case and submitted her DNA and her dental records to the FBI that did not result in any new leads. The case was revisited again in 2019 when Staten Island District Attorney Michael McMahon decided to use forensic genealogy technology in a joint effort with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, New York Police Department, and New York Medical Examiner Office. In March 2023, at a press conference, Michael McMahon announced that the victim had been identified as 30-year-old Christine Belusco. Christine was placed for adoption when she was an infant and was raised by a New Jersey couple. She lived in Clifton and worked for a clothing store. After she found out she was adopted, she left home in 1991 and briefly stayed at the Mount Airy Lodge in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. She had a 2-year-old daughter named Krista Nicole. Christine and Krista were both last seen at the resort in September 1991. None of Christine's family members knew she had lost her life. They assumed she was safely living in Florida. Michael McMahon said, "We have already notified Christine's family of her tragic end, and we continue to make all efforts to also locate Krista Nicole so we can let her know about who her mother was and what has been done to bring justice to this case." Despite the incredibly dedicated work of the New York Police Department at that time, authorities were unable to identify her or locate the person who took her life so savagely and viciously at such a young age. Nearly 30 years later, in a joint effort with the FBI and New York Police Department, detectives picked up the case and employed the use of forensic genealogy technology, which was unavailable in 1991, but invaluable in today's law enforcement world to bring closure to the victim's family. While the investigation into the case is ongoing, Michael McMahon said investigators believe the perpetrator was known to Christine. There is absolutely no indication that this was done by anyone other than someone who knew her, given the facts of the case and what transpired in the way that her life was ended. That certainly makes us think that this was someone who knew her. It is an intimate type of slaying, McMahon said. An age progression photo of Krista Nicole was released and the search for her whereabouts continues. There is currently no known information on who Krista's father is. If you recognize Krista Nicole or know anything about the slaying of Christine Belusco, call the Richmond County District Attorney's Office. The case of Wendy Trapaga Yolanda Cirillo was born in Miami, Florida. She was a 28-year-old single mother who lived a quiet life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Yolanda had devoted herself to raising her daughter and being a model mother, giving up the party life. After a while, Yolanda was ready to find stability and a new partner. She began a relationship with Michel Escoto, a man known for his good looks and impeccable grooming. Their relationship, which started out innocent and harmonious, gradually developed into love. Yolanda and Michel met at a computer engineering school. Although they had opposite personalities, she was calm and practical, while he was a romantic, adventurous, and gregarious person. Despite their differences, they found each other and began a promising relationship. Michel and Yolanda Cirillo seemed like an unlikely couple. However, after a year of living together, they started building a family. Yolanda, who already had a child from a previous relationship, was very happy to see her boyfriend Escoto loving her daughter. Everything seemed fine, but Michel still had one unfulfilled dream. He wanted to build a successful career and start his own business. Yolanda fully supported Michel's dream because she knew that his success would ensure a stable future for her and her daughter. She also hoped that they would get married and start a family. Michel promised Yolanda that he would give them the dream life they both craved when he achieved financial success. When looking at the most lucrative industries in Miami, Michel realized that there was a great demand for cosmetic services. So he decided to delve into this field. With a basic knowledge of hairdressing, he wanted to learn more about business to open his own salon. His goal was to create a space that was welcoming to everyone. Michel found a beauty school near where he lived and enrolled in February 2002. While studying at this school, Michel found himself different because he was one of the few men in the beauty industry while he was surrounded by young, dynamic women. These women were very interested in Michel because he was charming, easily won their hearts. This made him popular among the female students. However, despite his relationship with Yolanda, Michel could not resist the charms of Wendy Trapaga, a beautiful 21-year-old girl. He began to flirt with her and often behaved inappropriately around her, but he still did not tell Yolanda about these things. Every night, Michel still returned to Yolanda, maintaining the appearance of a normal family life, but the more time he spent with Wendy, the more he felt guilty towards Yolanda. Wendy Trapaga was different from the women Michel had met before. Wendy was sweet, charming, and had the figure of a model. Wendy was born on April 29, 1981, the daughter of Miriam and Ernest. She grew up in a normal and loving family. Wendy had always been loved by her father, Ernest, who had always made sure that Wendy had grown up in an environment filled with love and respect. Ernest had been a cargo pilot, and his job had required him to travel frequently, which had made Wendy always look forward to his return from each trip. Every time he had returned home, Wendy had been extremely happy and had received a gift from him. March 31st, 1988, had been an unforgettable day in Wendy's life when she had been 16 years old. Wendy's father's plane had exploded at an altitude of 150 feet above the ground and had crashed into a barren land near the runway. This tragedy had taken the lives of all passengers on board. The deep sadness that Wendy had experienced that day had followed her throughout her life. Ernest had been 61 years old when he had passed away, leaving Wendy's mother, Miriam, deeply saddened. After becoming a widow, Miriam had devoted herself to supporting her family and had secured a position as a school administrative assistant. She had worked hard to be able to supervise extracurricular programs at an elementary school in Miami-Dade County. Eventually, Miriam had found love again and had married Juan Bonet. Wendy had had half-siblings who had warmly accepted her, providing her with the much-needed affection she had been missing since her father's death. During her teenage years, Wendy had developed a strong passion for aesthetics and high fashion. She had possessed a captivating beauty with deep brown eyes, long hair, and a radiant smile, attracting everyone's attention. Despite this, Wendy had remained humble and kind, making those around her admire her even more. After completing her studies, Wendy had gotten married, but unfortunately, this marriage had soon fallen apart. This had motivated her to pursue her passion and learn from her relatives who had run beauty salons. So she had enrolled in Label Beauty Academy in Miami. There, Wendy had met Michel Escato, a man who could make her smile. Michel's charm and compliments had captivated her. Michel had introduced himself as an executive in the web design industry, with a degree in technology. Perhaps the loss of her father at an early age had made Wendy more sympathetic to older men, considering them safe. However, Michel had not revealed to Wendy that he had a girlfriend, Yolanda. Instead, he had spent more time with Wendy. The feelings between Wendy and Michel had grown deeper and deeper, and they had spent more time together. While Yolanda had thought that Michel was focused on his career, the relationship between Wendy and Michel had naturally turned from emotional to physical. Wendy and Michel had gradually become inseparable. However, Yolanda had felt confused by the changes in her relationship with Michel. Even though they had been together for more than 2 years, she had not known that Michel often met other women, one of whom had even sponsored his studies. Initially, Michel had only seen Wendy as a friend, but over time, he had begun to feel deeper feelings for her. He had appreciated the freedom and lack of pressure in his relationship with Wendy. However, Michel had always kept his relationship with Wendy a secret. Even though Michel and Wendy had been entering their second month of a romantic relationship, Michel had hidden it from everyone, which had made Wendy feel confused. Yolanda had also felt that Michel seemed to be growing more distant, and their relationship had started to feel more like best friends than lovers. Yolanda had become suspicious of Michel's schedule, and the silence had made the two of them grow more distant. Michel had eventually decided to end his relationship with Yolanda because he had fallen in love with Wendy. In August 2002, Michel and Yolanda had had an argument, and to express his dissatisfaction, Michel had packed his things and left. Yolanda could not believe it. Yolanda had dreamed of a future with Michel, but he had left without giving any explanation. Yolanda had tried to understand her shortcomings and the reason behind his departure. Yolanda had kept calling Michel, but he had not answered. Eventually, Yolanda had deciphered his voicemail password and had discovered messages revealing that he had moved in with another woman named Wendy. Yolanda was shocked to learn of Michel and Wendy's relationship and was furious. Michel and Wendy had moved into a modest apartment in Miami. Unexpectedly, in that small space, the two began a life filled with dreams and satisfaction. Although some of Wendy's family objected to her decision to live with Michel, Wendy's mother, Miriam, was concerned that Michel was almost a decade older than Wendy and, on top of that, he was still unemployed. She wondered if Wendy and Michel had ever shared their jobs or incomes. She was also extremely surprised to find that their house was almost bare, to the point that Wendy and Michel had to sleep on the floor. The most important thing to her was Wendy's happiness. While Wendy was always careful about her finances and kept a tight budget, Michel, on the other hand, was wasteful and unclear about how he earned his money. Miriam simply thought that Michel made money through IT to explain her doubts. Because there were so many questions about Michelle, Miriam, and her daughter, Wendy disagreed about Wendy's marriage. Miriam did not agree with Wendy's hasty decision to get married. Ignoring her mother's advice, Wendy and Michelle decided to go ahead with the wedding. They planned to hold a wedding ceremony at the City Hall in October 2002, with a simple legal procedure and a not-so-complicated wedding ceremony. When Miriam asked why they got married so quickly, Wendy revealed that she was pregnant. On October 10, 2002, Wendy and Michelle exchanged vows at the Miami Beach City Hall. They then planned a simple honeymoon in Key West, Florida. Michelle and Wendy left on Friday, October 11th, planning to return Sunday evening. Their two-day adventure in Key West was filled with fun times. However, on Sunday, Michelle and Wendy were reluctant to let their short vacation end. Michelle had booked a luxurious suite in a prestigious romantic hotel. Wendy was thrilled to have their honeymoon extended unexpectedly. Wendy informed her mother of the decision to extend their stay. Wendy's mother, Miriam, was also delighted to hear the news. Although she was concerned about Wendy's health due to her pregnancy, Miriam was happy for her daughter's happiness. Michelle and Wendy envisioned a romantic evening that included dining out, perhaps watching a movie, or dancing the night away at a nightclub. Michelle and Wendy arrived at the hotel close to midnight and spent some time alone together in their room. Little did they know that this would be Wendy's last night on Earth. At around 5:30 a.m. on Monday, Miriam was awakened by a surprise phone call. When she looked at the clock, she felt anxious about such an early call. Miriam picked up the phone feeling even more nervous. It was Michelle on the other end of the line, asking her if Wendy was with her and speaking in a cryptic tone. Michelle explained that they had gone out drinking the night before, and Wendy had wanted to stay even though he had been worried about their unborn child. This had led to their first argument in the car on the way home. He had gone back to the apartment alone while leaving her outside. When he had checked back after 5 to 10 minutes, she had disappeared. All attempts to contact her by phone had failed. After her conversation with Michelle, Miriam had agreed to give Wendy some space even though she was extremely worried about where Wendy might be at the moment. She had tried not to panic, but she had known that Wendy did not act that way. At 6 a.m., a sanitation worker walking his routine route through a commercial warehouse complex in the Northwest Dade area had contacted Miami police after noticing something unusual in the parking lot between two cars. As he had gotten closer, he had come across a woman wearing a blue evening gown lying face down in a pool of blood. The forensic experts had been stunned when they had arrived at the scene and had seen blood splattered on a nearby vehicle. An autopsy later revealed that the woman had been struck multiple times with a heavy object, leaving her body disfigured beyond recognition. Although no weapon had been found at the scene, the deceased had been quickly identified as Wendy Trapaga thanks to a driver's license and a wallet containing identifying items found next to her. When Miriam had received the devastating news of her daughter's death, she had been plunged into a deep depression. Tears streaming down her face, Miriam, who had lost her husband, now had to deal with the sudden loss of her daughter. As the detectives had worked to determine the cause of Wendy's death, Miriam had received a call from Wendy's husband, Michelle, asking for any updates on Wendy. Miriam had been speechless and had struggled to convey to Michelle that Wendy was no longer alive. A detective had intervened, taking over the call to inform Michelle that they would be visiting his home to discuss the matter in detail. Michelle had been completely stunned and unable to speak. The police had taken Michelle to the police station to gather more information. During a 14-hour interrogation, Michelle had recounted the events of the evening leading up to Wendy's tragic death. As they had left the hotel and driven home around 3 a.m., Michelle and Wendy had gotten into an argument over drinking. During the argument, Wendy had unexpectedly admitted to Michelle that she was not pregnant, which had added to the tension of the argument. As they had approached their apartment, Michelle had decided to go inside to give them both time to calm down, leaving Wendy in the car. That had been the last time he had seen Wendy. The autopsy report later revealed that Wendy had died from being repeatedly beaten with a blunt object, causing 15 to 20 severe injuries to her face and neck. Her face had been unrecognizable due to the injuries. There had also been signs of strangulation. Investigators had also found strange DNA on Wendy's dress. A physical examination had revealed that Wendy had had alcohol and sedatives in her system. Her estimated time of death had been between 3 and 5 a.m. on October 14th. Some strange points had also been discovered. Wendy had been found without shoes, but her feet had been clean. In addition, there had been no injuries to her hands and feet, suggesting that she might not have resisted during the attack, or that she might have been unconscious or restrained. The medical examiner had also confirmed that Wendy had not been pregnant at the time of her death, raising further questions about the reason behind her lie. Authorities had found a new lead. They had discovered that Michel had made a phone call at 3:15 a.m. the day his wife had died. Detectives followed up on a crucial lead and discovered that Michel's last call had been made to his ex-girlfriend, Yolanda. When informed of Wendy's death, Yolanda shared her love story with the police. She admitted to having had deep feelings for Michel and was heartbroken by his sudden passing. Despite attempts to contact him, he remained unresponsive until the fall of 2002 when he returned her call. When questioned, Michel admitted to having had an affair with another woman but maintained that he had no feelings for Wendy. He said that he still loved Yolanda and hoped to reunite with her. Yolanda, who still loved Michel, trusted him again and hoped that this would rekindle their romance. However, Michel continued to live a double life. The investigation was hampered by the lack of solid evidence, including DNA, fingerprints, surveillance camera footage, or even a murder weapon. All they had were unsubstantiated statements. About 2 months after Wendy's death, Michel reemerged as a prime suspect in the case. After being caught planning to cash in Wendy's life insurance policy, questions were raised about the true motives of Michel, who was the primary beneficiary of the policy. After this discovery, detectives suspected that Michel had a strong financial motive, seeing as the insurance policy was worth $1 million. The investigation team continued to pursue this theory. On the other hand, an unexpected aspect of Michel's personal history was revealed during the investigation. Michel had previously been arrested and charged with armed robbery. He was also charged with unlawful possession of a firearm and possession of drugs. 3 years after Wendy's death, detectives decided to interview Yolanda again, suspecting that she had more information than she had previously disclosed. After Wendy's death, Michel and Yolanda reunited and moved in together, but their life together was not a happy one. When Yolanda was brought in for questioning, law enforcement officers presented evidence that Yolanda had been the one who had funded Michel and Wendy's vacation after they had married. The police forced Yolanda to reveal the truth by warning her of the consequences of lying. Yolanda gradually opened up to the police. According to her testimony, when Yolanda and Michel resumed their relationship in the fall, Michel told her that he had to marry Wendy because Wendy was pregnant. However, in reality, Michel was indifferent to Wendy and planned to get rid of her to get the $1 million insurance money. Michel and Yolanda's ultimate plan was to kill Wendy and take her huge insurance money. Yolanda was blinded by her love for Michel and decided to go along with Michel's plan. The only thing she cared about was that Michel would reunite with her. According to the following testimony, after failing to get rid of Wendy during the holiday, Michel decided to take drastic action. Michel had laced Wendy's drink with a sedative in their hotel room. When Wendy began to fall asleep, Michel took her outside and put her in the car. In the middle of the night, Michel went to Yolanda's house and asked her to let him use her car. Michel then went to a parking lot far from the residential area in Northwest Dade and asked Yolanda to stay in the car for a while. Yolanda then witnessed Michel returning to her car with blood on his hands and a crowbar. They continued to Biscayne Bay, where Michel removed the murder weapon and washed away the evidence of the crime. Yolanda then drove Michel back to the residence she shared with Wendy, where Michel disposed of his bloody clothes. However, Yolanda's testimony may have been unreliable. Yolanda may have been more directly involved in the murder of Michel's wife. If Michel had not used the crowbar to kill his wife, it was possible that Yolanda herself was responsible for the brutality and disfigurement of Wendy's body. Unfortunately, the truth of this case may have remained unknown due to Yolanda's immunity agreement that protected her from arrest or prosecution. This was used by Michel's attorney to place the blame entirely on Yolanda in order to protect his client. However, after deliberating for just 2.5 hours, The jury convicted Michel Escoto of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison without parole. While Wendy's family finally felt that justice had been served after years of waiting, they were not entirely satisfied that Yolanda Cirillo would continue to walk free. In 1993, Jennifer Renee Odum was a 12-year-old 7th grader at Wesley Chapel, Florida's Thomas E. Waitman Middle School. She was a competitive barefoot water skier who placed highly in competitions, and she played clarinet in the school band. She was usually the skier who glided above the water, reaching the summit of the human pyramid. She was born on August 25, 1980. She was Renee Converse's oldest daughter and Clark Converse's stepdaughter. She was the granddaughter of Jim and Margie Denny, and she had a sister named Jessica and Odum, who was 9 years old. Their home was in St. Joseph, a little town close to Dade City, Florida. The rabbit owned by Jennifer and Jessica was named Beanie. Jennifer also had a deep affection for her Springer Spaniel named Gypsy. On the family's 15 acres, the two sisters constructed forts, went four-wheeling and swam in the creek behind their home during the summer. On Friday, February 19, 1993, which was a cold morning, Jennifer Odum dressed for school by putting on her white turtleneck and white jeans. She wore her grandmother's red cashmere sweater over her shoulder-length chestnut hair. She had spent a lot of time outside, which is why she was tan and skinny. She and her mother got into the car that same morning after she had put on her black boots. In order to wait for the school bus near their mailbox, the two drove 200 yards up the narrow Lime Rock driveway before Renee Converse, who was riding a shotgun, turned left to go to work. Jennifer got onto her school bus and settled into her usual spot in the back seat, where she and her mother could see each other. After school hours, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jennifer got off her school bus, said goodbye to her friends, and began the 200 yards walk home. When Jennifer's sister got home from school at around 4 p.m., their house was locked and she couldn't get inside. After waiting for a while, she informed their mother over the phone that her older sister had not returned home. That's when Converse realized Jennifer probably hadn't made it home. Michelle, Jennifer's closest friend, told her that she had witnessed Jennifer get off the bus and start walking home. Jennifer's mother called the police because she knew something was seriously wrong. In a matter of hours, deputies began a thorough search. About 400 volunteers joined a search party to assist in combing through an area of about 60 square miles known as Countryside. Volunteers, neighbors, family, and friends looked for Jennifer. The small Pasco County town of Dade City was surrounded by rolling pastures, woods, and groves that could be thoroughly searched by law enforcement using police dogs. Some of her classmates had seen a blue truck in the area, and it was the focus of every law enforcement agency in the Bay Area. The school bus children who accompanied Jennifer recalled seeing an older light blue pickup truck of an unidentified make and model slowly following her down the road in the direction that she was walking. The kids said it had a trailer hitch with pipes or a ladder in the back and a silver-painted rear bumper instead of a chrome one. The kids described the driver as a white man in his 40s with brown hair that reached his shoulders. Search teams concentrated on the blue truck because they thought the driver might have been connected to Jennifer's disappearance. The FBI Nando Police Department and Pasco County Sheriff's Office personnel worked from a dock in Boathouse to locate the truck as a last resort, while divers combed Lake Jovita for the same truck. On Thursday, February 25th, 6 days after Jennifer disappeared, a man and a woman going through an abandoned orange grove, roughly 10 miles north of Jennifer's school bus stop, discovered her severely decomposed nude body. Her body was discovered in the orange grove, close to a horse trail off Powell Road, south of Brooksville, surrounded by a stand of pine trees. She had been brutally attacked and had suffered a head injury from blunt force trauma. According to the detective, she most likely died there in the woods not long after going missing. Neither the blue truck nor its driver could be located. Jennifer's clothes couldn't be found either. On Monday, March 1st, 1993, country music icon Vince Gill was scheduled to perform at the local Strawberry Festival. This was while Jennifer's family was still busy organizing her funeral. According to Clark Converse, Jennifer's stepfather, the girls had been anticipating Gill's performance for weeks, hoping to get him to sign pictures. Clark, Converse, and Jessica attended the festival prior to the concert. In order to grant Jennifer's request that Gil sign a picture that she and her sister had taken of themselves with the singer earlier that year, Vice President Joe Newsom gave Gil, who was having dinner, the 3 photos in between the festival performances. Gil was asked by Jessica's stepfather to sign 3 copies, 1 for Jennifer, 1 for Jessica, and 1 for both girls. Newsom later remarked in an interview, "I told Gil this young lady had been killed and her dad was outside." In response, Gil said he was aware of the incident and that he also had a small daughter. He signed the pictures, writing "May God be with you" on the one for Jennifer. Gil went to the second show of the evening. He gave a brief speech to honor Jennifer to the audience before the final song. His voice cracked while he said, "I'm going to try to get through this the best I can." His Grammy-winning song, "I Still Believe in You," was performed by Gil and dedicated to Jennifer, who was sadly taken from this world too soon. Gil asked the audience to assist him in finishing the song as tears streamed down his face. Almost 15,000 people raised their voices. Jeff Moore, a radio personality, stood backstage and observed the thousands of faces covered in tears. It was extremely painful. He remarked later, regretfully, her case remained unresolved because no one in the community was able to provide investigators with pertinent information. On January 16, 1992, a 17-year-old girl was abducted in north-central Pasco County as she got off a school bus 13 months prior to Jennifer's kidnapping. She had been viciously beaten, assaulted, and found in a pool of blood behind an abandoned house. Investigators said she had very serious injuries to her skull and head. She lived, but her left side paralysis left her permanently altered. She was a real victim who had previously been on the honor roll and participated in track and field. She didn't lead a dangerous lifestyle. At the time, DNA could be obtained from the crime scene by law enforcement. Detectives thought there might be a connection between the cases because of the similarities between Jennifer's and the unidentified girls. The 2 victims were adolescent girls in Pasco County who were kidnapped after getting off the school bus, brought to a distant field, beaten, and left there in the hope that they would die from their wounds. Jennifer's body was discovered a mere few miles away from the location of the other victim. 16 months after the incident, the police called psychic Nancy Meyer to help them track down the person who caused the incident after they ran into several dead ends. For many years, Pennsylvania-born psychic Nancy Meyer has collaborated with law enforcement agencies across the nation. Nancy claimed to have consulted on over 300 criminal investigations and to have provided crucial leads over 80% of the time. Nancy thought that Jennifer's death was carried out by 2 men. She said one of them might be a smoker with a strong cough. She also characterized them as white muscular mechanics. The photos taken at the crime scene were under seal. Nancy Meyer was thus prohibited from viewing it. In spite of this, she could clearly picture 2 men. She was brought to the location where Jennifer's corpse was discovered. Nancy mentioned that there were items in the neighborhood that had not yet been found. She was able to provide details about a number of Jennifer's still missing belongings, such as her cousin's clarinet case bearing the initials LO. She persisted in providing details about the offenders in the hopes of cracking the case. Nancy Meyer was very accurate about certain things, according to Hernando County Sheriff's Office Detective Carlos Douglas. This accuracy caused the investigators to look in previously unconsidered areas. She provided a wealth of information to the detectives. On a national television program called Unsolved Mysteries, Jennifer's unresolved case was featured on December 2, 1994. The Hernando County Sheriff's Office received over 50 phone tips and additional investigative leads via mail after the show aired from all over the nation. According to a sheriff's office spokesman, the program accomplished their goals. It increased the case's exposure. Major Gary Zorn Smith, a former Hernando County sheriff, who oversaw the investigation in its early stages, claimed that the investigators were at a loss for words despite the new revelation. He stated that there was a good chance the crime would go unsolved and, even in the event that it might take another crime to solve it. Jennifer's missing book, bag, and clarinet case were found by a couple searching for scrap metal in a rural Hernando County on Thursday, January 5, 1995, about 2 years after her body was discovered. It was discovered a few miles away from where her body was found. The person thought to be responsible for her murder had fingerprints on her clarinet case and backpack that the police were able to collect. Sadly, there was never a match for a suspect with these fingerprints in the database. The Tampa Bay area was plagued by the case, which attracted national attention over time. Tipping was rewarded with money in the thousands. Jennifer's family awaited words as detectives spent tens of thousands of hours following leads. As the years grew into decades, Renee Converse, Jennifer's mother, questioned if it was someone Jennifer knew. Jennifer's stepfather, Clark Converse, stated that there was a good possibility perpetrator was someone the family knew. As each year goes by without any resolution, Converse claims to cry a little bit more. The reality is that Jennifer is gone and will never be in our lives again. Nothing is going to change that, she said. Additionally, according to Converse, the family is appreciative of what they do know. That we have this much closure is a blessing. We know where she is, so we're not searching for her. It's going to be a very bittersweet ending, she said. Converse could still see her slender, sun-kissed 12-year-old daughter waving farewell from the back window of the Pasco County school bus. She would never again get to see her firstborn daughter, who had brown eyes. "I love you" was the last thing Converse remembers the two saying to each other. The couple claimed to have exhausted all avenues of collaboration in the hunt for Jennifer's killer. In order to prevent any more tragedies, they wanted the person found. The St. Petersburg Times announced on Monday, February 19, 2007, that it had been 14 years since Jennifer was kidnapped and her murder was unsolved. During the same year, Hernando County Crime Stoppers members gave special playing cards with a hotline number and a brief description of an unsolved case from around the state to inmates at the Hernando County Detention Center. Jennifer had 2 color photos on her Queen of Diamonds card. The Hernando Sheriff's Office has a web page featuring images and details about Jennifer. Additionally, a slideshow featuring Jennifer's pictures is assembled. George Lloydgren, a detective from Hernando County, later led the cold case division. Along with some unsettling theory, he had access to the newest DNA technology. "I believe that there is probably one person, if not more, that would know who is responsible for this," he stated. Additionally, he thought that the person might be an ex-spouse or family member who is either afraid to come forward or is protecting the offender. "I think the reason people do not want to get involved is they may not want to sit there and have to testify against that individual. Investigators believed there were multiple people out there with more information and they wanted them to come forward after receiving a few anonymous tips over the years. They experimented with a number of strategies to get fresh leads, including billboards, a $20,000 reward, and a national TV documentary. Over time, investigators gathered approximately 1,000 pieces of evidence, received thousands of tips, and conducted hundreds of interviews in an effort to identify Jennifer's killer. The sheriff's office was contacted by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which offered to scan all of the case files for Jennifer so they would be easily accessible. Over 75,000 pieces of paper were involved. There were hints found throughout every investigation, such as the fingerprints found on Jennifer's backpack and clarinet case. Suspects were also present. Frank Daniel Potts, a serial offender, was one potential suspect. In 1993, he sexually assaulted a 10-year-old girl in Lakeland. He had a blue pickup truck that he had allegedly dismantled, and he was employed at a construction site in Pasco County at the time of the killing. The authorities were unable to connect him to the case of Jennifer, but Walter Duchesne was residing in the neighborhood at the time of the murder, was also a potential suspect. According to his ex-wife, he could be the offender. Her testimony was contradictory, though. He was not indicted when the case against him was brought before a grand jury. It was no longer thought that he was connected to the case. Detective George Lloydgren received a call from Pasco County Sheriff Chris Naco in February 2015. He said the case of the teenage girl found alive in 1992 had a good lead thanks to new technology. Investigators thought the case was connected to Jennifer's. Naco stated that there was a 1 in 7.7 nonillion chance of discovering another match. As with any of the previous cases, Lloydgren remarked, "I believe DNA will play a significant role in Jennifer's case because artifacts were gathered. the advancement of technology is relatively recent. Before February 2015, the biological evidence uncovered during the 1992 case investigation was tested and investigators obtained a complete DNA profile. By comparing male DNA left at the scene with that of family members, investigators can identify a suspect through a DNA technique called familial searching. A standard DNA search's drawback is that it requires the offender database to have a suspect's genetic fingerprint on file in order for law enforcement to match. In order to determine whether any close matches between the DNA and local DNA might be family members, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement compared the samples. A jailed Jeffrey Norman Crum was identified by the sheriff as the person whose DNA was found to match. DNA samples from Crum's father, grandfather, and brother were acquired by investigators. There was a clear match between the DNA found on the victim and Crum's father's DNA. Investigators came to the conclusion that Jeffrey Crum grabbed the girl from the 1992 case by the arm, led her around the side of the abandoned house, and struck her head very forcefully with a blunt object. She lost a portion of her brain and part of her skull, which left her partially paralyzed. After that, Jeffrey Crum, who was 53 at the time, was eventually taken into custody in relation to the 1992 case. Authorities claim that Crum became a person of interest in this case because of his arrest. The detective in charge of Jennifer's case said that when Crum was linked to the 1992 case, he nearly immediately rose to the top of the suspect list in Jennifer's case due to the similarities, which revived the investigation. He added that although there had been suspects over the years, Crum was not on the list. Marking the 25th anniversary of her death, Jennifer's mother told The Times in 2018 that she and other family members tried to have faith that her daughter's case would eventually be solved. Crum's 1992 crime left his victim partially paralyzed, and he was sentenced to life in prison. During the sentencing hearing, the victims testified in court and described the harm he had caused that would last a lifetime. Her aunt said that day was the end of her life. She brought up Jennifer as well. A year later, a young lady, Jennifer Odum, was killed. She continued, and that brought back so many different things. That today the perpetrator still has not been caught. Detective Lloyd Grin gained new resolve after Crum's arrest and sentencing, and Jennifer's family felt hopeful that the culprit would be apprehended. Following that, detectives launched a thorough investigation and spent the next few years speaking with everyone they could locate. They might have been connected to Crum at the time of Jennifer's abduction. The state attorney received this information, and a grand jury was given the facts and circumstances. A month before Jennifer would have turned 43 on July 27, 2023, authorities declared that they had made an arrest in the case and that the prosecution intended to seek the death penalty for the defendant. Bill Glass, the state attorney, announced the news at a press conference. This occurred shortly after the Hernando County Sheriff's Office declared that 61-year-old Jeffrey Norman Crum has been charged with Jennifer's kidnapping, assault, and death. After spending years looking into Jennifer's case, Detective George Lloydgren said that shock is probably the best word to describe how Jennifer's family responded when he informed them about the arrest. He claimed that he acted swiftly to avoid becoming emotional. They had a lot to process, and he anticipates that it will take some time for it to fully register. The sheriffs claim that every credible lead for the previous 30 years, whether from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, or private citizens, has been thoroughly investigated. This investigation has involved countless detectives, sworn law enforcement officers, civilians, and tipsters. More victims are being sought after by investigators. Authorities worry that Crum might be involved in more offenses. A 1993 photo of him was made public along with a request for anyone who knew him in the 1980s and 1990s to get in touch with the sheriff's office. We urge anyone who had interactions with this individual to come forward with information on other crimes he may have committed and/or may have themselves been a victim of Jeffrey Crum to reach out to the Hernando County Sheriff's Office and speak to our cold case unit. Authorities maintain a tight lid on details, but they did reveal that in 1992, Crum lived on Somerset Lane in Spring Hill, the Pasco County region, where Jennifer was kidnapped and he worked as a drywall installer in the construction industry. His home was roughly 12 miles from Jennifer's body discovery location and 21 miles from the location where she was last seen. He drove a blue truck at the time, according to officials. The case's lead detective repeatedly stated during a news conference on Thursday, July 27, 2023, that Crum had not been on the investigators' radar until recently. According to records, Crum has a long history of convictions for violent crimes. The sheriff said that Crum had been taken into custody for armed robbery in Hillsborough County in 1985. In Hillsborough County, he was accused of kidnapping, assault, and false imprisonment. In 1987, he was taken into custody by Tampa police for carrying a concealed weapon. When he was discovered carrying a concealed weapon once more in 1988, he was accused of aggravated assault. He was taken into custody 3 times in Hernando County in 1998 on charges of domestic abuse. He was arrested in Hillsborough County in 2001 for violating his probation. A few years later, he was taken into custody in Hernando County on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. He was detained in Pasco County in 2015 on suspicion of aggravated assault against a child under the age of 12. According to the detective, he was a violent person who liked to do bad things. For the assault and kidnapping case out of Pasco County that was prosecuted around 2015, Crum is already serving 2 life sentences. At present, he is housed in the Hernando County Jail. Judge Kurt assigned a public defender to represent him and directed that he be held without bond. Following the kidnapping and murder of Jennifer Odum, residents of Pasco and Hernando counties were on edge. When the news of the arrest broke, they talked about their feelings and thoughts. The general manager of Brooksville's Papa Joe's Italian restaurant, Jeannie Cameron, said that she and other residents recall hearing about her disappearance all too well. Joseph Gyraton, the owner of Papa Joe's Italian restaurant, stated back then, 30 years ago as a parent, I was very angry that someone could do something like that to a child and then leave her there in the middle of nowhere. Jessica Ellis claimed to have attended Whiteman Middle School with Jennifer and to have participated in band class together in the clarinet section. I would say we saw each other a lot. We weren't like close friends, but we knew a lot of the same people. We rode the school bus every day, and I just remember her always being nice with me and everyone else that rode her school bus. In the days, months, and years that followed Jennifer's death, there was fear and grief. For many people in the community, Jeffrey Norman Crum's arrest provides closure. On June 21, 2021, a groundskeeper, while clearing ground cover, discovered a human body close to a trail on the southeast side of Metson Lake in Golden State Park, San Francisco, California. The white male was lying on a blanket and sleeping bag, surrounded by trash and miscellaneous items. The man was wearing a tank top, dark jeans, underwear, and leggings. A small partial can of chewing tobacco was located in his rear pants pocket. During the autopsy, the San Francisco chief medical examiner estimated the man to be about 45 years old. There was no evidence of trauma on the body. Based on the condition of the body, authorities estimated that the man passed away 2 weeks before he was found. When detectives were unable to identify the man who became known as the Metson Lake John Doe and the case seemingly going cold, they reached out to the DNA Doe Project for help. The DNA Doe Project is a non-profit investigative genealogy research outfit that says on its website that it has become a go-to organization for law enforcement agencies and medical examiners across North America, helping them solve their most intractable cases. Right away, the DNA Doe Project team had an important clue. There was a match in the range of a first cousin that was on the John Doe's maternal side. From this, the team was able to identify the specific branch of the John Doe's family tree and determined he was one of 6 children. Only 2 of the siblings were male, and a proof of life study ruled out one of the brothers. This meant that in March 2023, the John Doe was positively identified as Kurt Jerome Aiken. After the identification was made, people came forward to shed light on Kurt's life. He was a homeless man living in Golden Gate Park. Like many people experiencing homelessness, Kurt was disconnected from his family. He carried no identification, and no one came to claim his remains. Area residents knew him to be a local terror. One person stated that Kurt was friendly in the past, but developed some sort of hatred towards dogs and was known to verbally and physically attack people, especially women walking their dogs in the area. Dog walker in the park named Rainer said in an interview. He escalated to charging us on the trails and kicking the dogs. She even shot video of him jumping out of the bushes, armed and threatening to end her and her dog's lives. She also mentioned an incident in which he threw a rock through the window of her van, shattering it and sharing the animals in glass. He was allegedly arrested in 2019 for throwing coffee on a woman, her dog, and her stroller. I am one of about a dozen women with dogs that he has attacked over the years. I was not a fan of the man, Reiner said. It's still unknown what caused the demise of Kurt Jerome Aiken. Investigators didn't detect any foul play. Many are of the opinion that he died from natural causes. Case of Jessica Camileri. Jessica Camileri, the second daughter of Rita and Vince, an Australian Maltese couple, was born with a mild mental disability. Her IQ was between 55 and 60, placing her in the bottom 1% of the population. People with mild intellectual disability like Jessica learn to communicate and express themselves, but at a slower pace than others. They may take longer to develop skills like speaking, reading, writing, and math, but they can still adapt to daily life. Due to her condition, Jessica was slow in reaching developmental milestones like walking, talking, and coordinating movements. She started school much later than her peers, which made her a target for teasing, discomfort, and bullying from her classmates for being different. As a result, Jessica developed stress, anxiety, and anger, particularly towards females. She also struggled with intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by sudden repeated outbursts of impulsive, aggressive, and violent behavior, as well as angry verbal eruptions that were disproportionate to the situation. At school, Jessica exhibited aggressive behavior towards both students and teachers, including a notable incident where she punched a male student and refused to release her grip, leading to her indefinite suspension, and subsequent confinement at home under the care of her mother, Rita, who received a disability pension to support her. Jessica's behavioral issues were symptomatic of her intellectual disability and struggled with irrational outbursts of anger. Furthermore, she was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, a chronic brain condition that affects millions of children worldwide, making it challenging for her to regulate her behavior. In addition to these conditions, Jessica also suffered from severe bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and autism spectrum disorders, which impacted her judgment, self-awareness, and empathy towards others. She had obsessive tendencies such as fixating on her three favorite numbers, 2, 3, and 5, each of which she associated with a specific color, yellow, green, and purple. Respectively, Jessica would often repeat these numbers to generate random phone numbers, which she would then use to call and talk to men. In one instance, starting in 2018, she began harassing the staff of a meat company in Daylesford, England, even going so far as to threaten the owner's family, claiming she would decapitate them with a chainsaw. Jessica had a persistent fascination with horror movies, particularly the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She would spend hours re-watching disturbing videos, and this obsession often led to furious outbursts when her mother, Rita, tried to restrict her access to these films. Jessica and her mother lived together in a house in St. Clair, a suburb of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Jessica's father, Vince, had divorced Rita during her teenage years due to the strain their daughter's behavioral problems had put on their marriage. Jessica struggled with low self-esteem and a childish, naive outlook, but she also displayed strong narcissistic tendencies. Deep down, she felt she was one of a kind and entitled to special treatment due to her mental disability. This occasionally led her to be exploitative and egocentric. Despite this, Rita remained devoted to caring for her daughter, acknowledging her issues, but feeling a strong sense of responsibility to look after and protect her. Rita even went so far as to reach out and apologize to one of the recipients of Jessica's harassing phone calls, confessing that she was at a loss for how to manage her daughter's behavior. Jessica was very close to her mother, who dedicated her life to taking care of her and meeting all her needs. Instead of sending her to a psychiatric institution for full-time care, her mother chose to keep her at home. In fact, Rita's life revolved around Jessica. The tragic event of July 20th, 2019 was not a standalone incident. In the 6 years leading up to it, Jessica had been convicted twice for assaults that caused actual bodily harm. She had also physically attacked her aunt and her sister's mother-in-law by pulling their hair. But she avoided jail time and was always placed in the care of her mother Rita, the one person who could tolerate her behavior. Jessica had also exhibited aggressive behavior towards women she encountered in the streets and shopping centers, lashing out at those she perceived as looking at her wrongly or making her feel ashamed. On one occasion, she was even barred from a doctor's office after becoming violent towards another patient in the waiting room due to paranoia. In early 2018, Jessica's aggressive behavior continued when she attacked a nurse during a hospital visit with her mother Rita. As a result, she was admitted to a mental health unit for 9 days to treat a severe episode of mood disorder. She was prescribed lithium for her supposed bipolar disorder, along with antipsychotic medications. However, by the end of 2018, about 6 months before the tragic event, Jessica had stopped taking her medication and instead began using natural remedies to manage her conditions. Rita was at her wit's end and paid $2,500 to a medium on Queen Street in St. Mary's, a western suburb of Sydney, in a desperate bid to exorcise the demon she believed was possessing her daughter Jessica. Despite her family and friends warning her about the dangers of living with Jessica, Rita remained adamant that her daughter wouldn't hurt anyone. According to Christy, Jessica's older sister, their mother Rita had a heart of gold, always putting others before herself, including Jessica, who continually refused to seek professional help. Rita's sister often voiced her concerns that Jessica might harm her, recognizing Rita's unconditional love for her daughter. However, Rita's motherly love made her oblivious to these warnings, even on the day before the tragic attack when she had to take Jessica to a police station due to her threatening calls to strangers. Jessica felt humiliated by her mom in a parking lot after visiting her sister due to a stranger's brief presence. Later, when her mom refused to order food from Red Rooster, Jessica called the restaurant 3 times. She then demanded her mom call a doctor, but Jessica's erratic behavior scared him off. At wit's end, Rita called an ambulance to take Jessica to a mental health facility. On the night of July 20th, 2019, Jessica's most severe episode of rage was about to unfold. In a brutal attack, Jessica dragged her 57-year-old mother Rita by the hair to the kitchen of their own home. There, she savagely attacked Rita with 7 meat cleavers, 4 of which broke under the force of her blows. In total, Jessica stabbed Rita over 100 times in the head and neck, driven by a morbid curiosity fueled by her daily obsession with horror films. The autopsy revealed the full extent of Rita's injuries, which included massive trauma to her head and neck, and death by multiple stab wounds that resulted in decapitation at the second vertebrae in her upper neck. Furthermore, Rita's body showed over 90 defensive wounds, indicating that she was conscious for a significant part of the attack. Enduring extreme physical pain and emotional terror at the hands of her own daughter, whom she had lovingly cared for. Jessica's 4-year-old nephew, the son of her older sister Christy, was present during the attack. The boy had been in Rita's care for a few days due to Jessica's apparent improvement. However, he was forced to witness Jessica repeatedly stabbing his grandmother and ultimately decapitating her. When the boy tried to intervene, Jessica attacked him, causing a minor head injury. The traumatic scene was so disturbing that the young boy began vomiting in response. Jessica called the emergency number from her mother Rita's cell phone, confessing to her murder and claiming self-defense, stating that Rita had attacked her first. However, this was not true, and Jessica had actually committed the brutal act. In reality, after killing her mother, Jessica panicked and repeatedly stabbed Rita's lifeless body, ultimately decapitating her and inflicting over 100 wounds. She then dumped Rita's head in a nearby neighbor's front yard. When the police arrived at their St. Clair, Sydney home, Jessica was outside, her clothes stained with her mother's blood, holding a water bottle. She showed no remorse for her actions and was more concerned about her own fate. Jessica asked the police officers and detectives if it was possible to bring someone back to life after decapitation, believing in the possibility of medical miracles that could reattach her mother's head. The police officer responded that this idea was unrealistic, but Jessica insisted, thinking that doctors could perform miraculous surgeries and reattach her mother's head. She also inquired about the potential consequences of her actions, specifically asking if she would face the death penalty. Upon learning that Australia does not have capital punishment, Jessica felt relieved. Furthermore, Jessica confessed to the police that the idea of decapitating her mother came from the horror movies she obsessively watched. A police officer's body camera recorded a chilling conversation at the crime scene on July 20, 2019, at 11:43 p.m. The first responders described the scene as one of the most horrific they had ever seen. The next day, July 21, 2019, Jessica appeared in court but didn't apply for bail. A friend explained that this was not surprising, as Jessica probably didn't understand the bail process. After a trial that highlighted her long history of mental illness, Jessica was found guilty of manslaughter in December 2020. She had pleaded not guilty to murder due to her disability. In early 2021, Jessica was sentenced to a maximum of 21 years and 7 months in prison. She will be eligible for parole after serving 16 years and 2 months, which would be September 19, 2035. The prosecutor argued that Rita's brutal murder was the culmination of a lifetime of escalating violence by Jessica, which started with hair pulling and eventually led to a deadly explosive attack. The prosecutor also stated that Jessica posed a moderate to high risk of reoffending and remained a danger to the community. Christy, Jessica's older sister, said that Jessica had killed and butchered their mother, and for that she could never forgive her. However, Rita's sister held a different view, hoping that Jessica would get the help she needed and that Rita could finally rest in peace, knowing that Jessica was being cared for by a system that had failed her when she was alive. The judge presiding over the case offered counseling services to the jury members, recognizing that the disturbing evidence they had heard could haunt them long after the trial. The judge also admitted that selecting a jury for Jessica's trial was difficult, as many people were reluctant to participate in a trial involving such a disturbing crime. The judge described Rita's murder as one of the most brutal and cruel cases of homicide a court could encounter, emphasizing that the crime's severity was exacerbated by its occurrence in the victim's own home. Jessica's lawyer revealed that his client had expressed regret in a letter to her family after the crime. In the letter, Jessica accepted responsibility for her mother's death, acknowledging that Rita had not provoked her and taking blame for her actions. However, one of the psychiatrists who evaluated Jessica noted that she struggled to communicate through social gestures and displayed a relatively flat affect. The psychiatrist found no evidence of schizophrenia or hallucinations in Jessica. The conclusion was that Jessica's risk factors could only be managed in the long term with a comprehensive mental health support plan. Since entering prison, Jessica has persistently caused trouble. Only 2 months after her arrival on September 9, 2019, she got into a fight with another inmate over food trading and threw a teacup at them. Although she was charged with assault in local court the next day, she did not receive any additional punishment. On October 14, 2019, Jessica attacked another inmate, which resulted in her being placed in solitary confinement in her cell for 5 days. On November 3, 2019, she disobeyed an order, and on July 31, 2020, she damaged property, incurring a fine of $200 Australian dollars. Jessica was involved in another assault on November 21, 2020, which led to her being placed in solitary confinement for 7 days. In January 2021, she was convicted of common assault again, but did not receive any further punishment. Jessica has explained her behavior, saying that other prisoners make her life difficult, regardless of what she does or where she goes. She has also stated that prison life is tough and very different from the outside world. On May 15, 2023, Justice Peter Hamill of the Sydney Supreme Court rejected claims that Camieri's original sentence was too harsh, and that the judge who sentenced her had misjudged the severity of her crime. However, Justice Hamill did rule that Camileri should be resentenced, a decision supported by Justices Christine Adamson and Richard Kavanaugh. The basis for this decision was Camieri's bizarre behavior, including walking into the street with her mother's head and asking emergency responders if they could reattach it, which demonstrated how out of touch with reality her actions were. After considering the opinions of multiple psychiatrists and a psychologist, Justice Hamill found that Calleri's intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder meant she only had a basic understanding of what was morally wrong. As a result, he ordered that she be resentenced to 16 years in prison, with a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.